Hello everyone and welcome to How Does Your Garden Grow? Today we are going to be talking about pallet gardening and the pallet garden that we created, a group of us here at the Juliet Hampton Morgan Memorial Library, to go right out front of our building to help spruce things up a bit and make things look a little bit nicer. My name is Andrew Foster. I am joined by
Suzanne, Horton, and we are both reference librarians here at the Morgan Library.
We've also got at a couple of various points through this discussion of how we did it, some of the people who helped us who can give a little bit of insight about what they learned, what they did, and maybe just kind of some tips and tricks that they maybe picked up while doing this project that might help people at home who are thinking about doing something similar at their house.
Right, so I'm going to share with you how we got this idea and a bit of the process at the beginning. I was opening the library one day and a shipment came in on a wooden pallet, and a staff member was taking the items off the pallet, and I asked, well, what do we do with these pallets when we're done with them? And he said, oh, they just go on the loading dock and they get thrown away. And I thought, we could probably do something with this. So at that point, when Andrew came in for the day, I said, hey, Andrew, there's this pallet and there's more back there apparently. Do you think we could do something crafty with them and make a program out of it? And within 5 minutes, he had perked up and had ideas and, scurried toward me with all these inspirations.
So so I had a number of different ideas, and as I kind of looked at the ideas I wanted to do, one of the things I generally do with a project like this is I'll take my ideas and I'll, if I can, find pictures of ideas and possibilities for things that can be, or if I don't have pictures, I'll just start drawing kind of what I want in that project. So for this one, I had 3 different possible plans that I thought we could maybe do for the pallet garden, and we ended up settling on one of these. But the 3 plans were for just essentially a raised bed planter using a pallet, for a vertical planter, which I like to affectionately call the wall of plants, or for just a vertical pallet garden where instead of going outwards, all the plants are going upwards, which requires a little bit more work, but overall tends to be kind of the nicer looking project of the 3. So we talked about it, we kind of looked at our possibilities, and eventually we decided that we were going to do that vertical pallet garden, the one that you see in the bottom middle, for our plan. And there's my lovely drawing of it that you all can see of how it would end up looking in an ideal world.
Yeah, and so he came up with these, he brainstormed these ideas, he hit me up with them, and I really liked them. I thought the one we ended up going with was the nicest looking. And so we called in our head librarian, Eloise Holmes, and she liked the idea, and she said, we should go for it, but we needed to check with administration to see if we could put it on the property, where we could do it, etc. She floated it to Juanita O's, our director, and she loved the idea, and she wanted us to put it front and basically center in front of the library, and so it was full steam ahead, and we were very lucky to have administrative support like that.
So when looking at a project like this, after drawing the plan, part of the drawing of the plan is to, at least for me, help me gather my thoughts and figure out what is going to be needed to accomplish what we're going to do. As I kind of got to go ahead for all this, I just sat down and I made a list of what I thought we would need to get this done. Some of it we had on hand, or some of it Susie and I had available that we could pull from home to work on the project with. And some of it is stuff that's going to be in most houses that are possibly doing this kind of thing, though if you don't have them, it's not that big a deal. Most of them are not too expensive for the most part to acquire some of those basic tools.
No, and you're going to get your use out of them if you plan on gardening for very long.
But my list came down, and I pretty well put everything together, and really the biggest cost for something like this came down to the plants. Plants can get kind of expensive if you're buying them as anything but seeds, which is basically a ratio of money versus time as you're doing them. And so we didn't really have time to be doing seeds, especially since it's a little bit late in the season. We wanted to go ahead and get this looking nice, with the idea that since we didn't know when we were opening, if we were going to be opening within a few days of it putting out, we wanted it to be front and center and already looking nice for our patrons whenever they came in. So we went shopping. We ended up buying close to what was actually on the list. Some things we bought a little bit more, some things we bought a little bit less. But we bought 3 bags of potting soil, a roll of landscape fabric, a pack of sandpaper, 3 bags of mulch, 2 cans of stain, a pack of rags, 2 hinges, and 2 plastic tarps. And then for our flowers, we spent more than half of our shopping trip kind of sitting over in the flowers and plants and arguing and looking at things and basically acting like crazy people in one way or another. But we ended up buying 6 different plants for this project, and each one we kind of bought with a specific purpose in mind for why we bought it. We were pretty intentional about buying it.
Yes, and we wanted things that looked nice but smelled nice, and that liked certain amounts of light, and also things that were fairly hardy, because the pallet was going to be exposed 100% of the time. We're a public institution, so there are people that are going to come up and maybe try to pick them or whatever. Of course, if you pull it out, it's gone. But most of these plants are pretty sturdy and are going to withhold the elements and human interaction well.
So with what we bought impatiens. Impatiens do well in shade. And so with our pallet, and if you have the opportunity to come out and look at our pallet, you'll notice that the bottom 2 levels stay in shade a chunk of the day.
Yeah.
And so we bought the impatiens actually to go towards the bottom so that our sun-loving flowers wouldn't suffer from a lack of sunlight from those upper levels. The zinnias we bought because they're pretty and I like them.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the justification I used, and you know that you don't really have to have much better of a reason than that.
No, I mean they do draw bees.
They do draw bees.
They're eye-catching.
Marigolds are also very colorful. They were a color we didn't have with the orange, and they actually work well as a bug deterrent. If you've got a garden and you plant marigolds all around the outside of it, you're going to have less of a presence of those pest insects in your garden, because that smell from the marigolds will push them away. Right. The purple basil we bought both as a different color. We were looking at actual regular basil to get, because we wanted to get some herbs to go with the garden, and basil is a very scenty plant, and so we wanted to get some basil, and then we saw the purple basil and we said, ooh, yeah, it's basil, but it's purple.
But it's purple, and everything else was green, so we wanted that kind of dynamic shift in color.
We bought lavender for the smell, as well as it being a hardy plant, and the same for the mint. The mint is hard to kill once it's established.
If it's in there, it's in there.
And so we picked up all these different plants, and as we were kind of looking through all the different plants, especially for the things like the basil, the lavender, the mint, the things that didn't come in a pack of 12 or 18 or those big packs, we dug through all the plants that were where we bought them, and we looked for ones that had multiple plants in a container.
Right.
Because once you've got those multiple plants, you can break the root balls apart, and you can get more than your money's worth versus getting just one plant. So we kind of dug for those, and we actually got 4 out of the basil, and I think there were 2 lavender each in the lavender containers we got.
Yeah, we ended up not separating those though. We let them sort of bunch together so that they can spread.
So we had everything picked out, and our next step was where one of our pages joined us for a little bit of destructive fun. As we kind of went out to the loading dock out back, and we started digging through our collection of old pallets that had been used for different things that had been sitting out in the weather. And these weren't especially nice pallets. These weren't any pallets that were made for doing crafts. These were just pallets that had been made to hold things. And so we had a number of pallets out back that were in rough shape. But we dug through, and we ended up picking out 2 of the pallets that were in better shape. And we actually, at this point, had a slight change of plans that did kind of mean that we may have overbought just a bit.
Yes.
Because as we looked through the pallets, we had the original plan was to do 4 tiers in our vertical garden, but the 2 nicer pallets that we were able to find were ones that would only let us do 3 tiers. but we decided to go with them anyways because we did want to use the better, sturdier, and better conditioned pallets for this project, so that we wouldn't have to worry about the wood coming apart sooner, or having to try and fill gaps that the boards were broken or anything like that. So we went out and we picked our pallets. We had a slight change of plans, but we picked pallets that we thought would do the job pretty well. And then we went to task for getting them ready.
Right.
And for that, there were several different steps that we took. And some people, these are the less desirable, more difficult steps. Some people like tearing things apart, and these are the steps you're going to love.
And we called in Shin Young
Hi.
to help. It's always good to get your frustration out safely with a hammer and something you're supposed to destroy, not something you're not supposed to destroy.
So we took a hammer, we took some different tools out back, and we started prying off boards, banging off boards pretty well, however we could get those excess boards off of it. We forced them off. You can see in the bottom left picture, as we were kind of forcing, there were bits that just broke off and were kind of left on.
Yeah, there were, and it, you want to be careful. You want to make sure you wear heavy-duty work gloves, and you have masks on in the pictures. That's not just because of COVID, but because there's like shards of wood and later sawdust flying everywhere. And so you want to be careful. You want to pay attention to the people that are around you. But I was very thankful for both Shin Young and Andrew at this point, because that wood was pernacious. It was stuck on hard, and because it's a very hard wood the pallets are made of, because they're meant to hold a lot of weight. So I struggled. We did use the back end of a hammer, but I feel like a pry bar
would have made it a lot easier.
Yeah. And then even when you got the boards off, sometimes there were just nails hanging out. So either we would have to pry them out or hammer them further back in. So there's a bit of, this is, for me, was the least fun part of the process, but definitely necessary.
And this is a part of the process that if you do one of the other types of pallet gardens, you can skip this step entirely. This was really just because we chose to do that vertical garden. It's the only reason we had to do this step.
Yeah.
So if you're not interested in using a hammer or a sledgehammer or anything like that to try and pull pieces of wood off that are firmly on there, there are other types of projects you can do with a pallet that aren't going to require any of this kind of work, hardly at all, except maybe a little bit of sanding.
Yeah. Did you find the destruction therapeutic, Gina?
Not really. I was kind of scared of the hammer slipping out of my hand.
Yeah.
So if you have like another person working with you, make sure that they also know the precautions. But if it is too much, like Susie said, just use like a pry bar or something safer.
So once we pulled off the boards, we took several pieces of sandpaper and pretty well all three of us kind of just went to town, sanding every bit. Pallets, by their nature, as we already said, are kind of a rough wood. They're very hard wood. They're not made to be pretty. The people who make them, especially the cheaper pallets like these, they just slap them together with whatever they've got on hand, because they just need pallets to put stuff on. So they're not designed to be that super attractive, and that's part of the charm of a pallet garden, is that it's using that rougher, more rustic wood to get the effect that you're going for.
Yeah, the flaws made them endearing, and as Shin Young really took to sanding.
I kind of overdid it. You don't have to overdo it. I just like that it was super smooth and almost soft if you overdid it. But you just need to do it to the point where there's not going to be any kind of danger of splintering or getting hurt.
And you can see there's parts of this wood that have such interesting character. There's a part in the middle on that's still the lower left picture. It's sort of rounded in the middle, and it just reminded me of like an old shipboard from colonial times or something. And when it stained, it looked really nice. But I would definitely suggest a sandpaper block. We just used sheets of sandpaper, and they just disintegrated as we were.
Yeah, if you've got a sandpaper block to wrap the sandpaper around, it just makes it easier to grip, so that you can use more of the sandpaper before it starts trying to come apart on you. So that is definitely something that's not necessary, but it does make it a bit easier at times whenever you're doing these kind of projects.
Yeah, and definitely the mask for all the
Mhm.
sawdust floating around because it got in hair
Yeah.
and clothes.
So if you don't want sawdust getting everywhere, you know, cover the hair, cover the skin.
Do it outside too, because it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Open areas do help with that. All right, so our next step in the process, we were actually joined by another one of our pages, Kiana Pelt, who helped us with the staining process along with some of our other staff. So she's joined us here to talk about it. Staining, for those of you who don't know, is sort of like painting, but completely different. You take the stain, and the stain is intended to go on generally wood. And essentially, the idea is that you are just going to stain the wood into whatever color you want it to be. Unlike paint, it is generally a pretty thin substance, so it's not going to stick to a brush. So actually, whenever you apply a stain to something, generally you're going to use a rag or something similar, something that can kind of soak up the material to transfer it onto what you're doing. So for staining, we chose a darker stain to go onto our wood, hoping that you know, the darker color would pretty well hide a lot of the imperfections that were in these pallets, since they were pallets that we just kind of picked up and pulled from what we had on hand.
Yeah, and we the bricks on our building have a reddish hue, so we didn't want to get a red stain or a really light stain. We wanted it to stand out a bit from the building itself, so we had, again, had looked at the environment to see what would look best there. And in the end, I do like the dark stain. I feel like it could have been lighter, but I'm fairly happy with the choice.
Yeah, I think it worked out pretty well. Kiana, would you like
I like the dark stain. This was actually my first time working with staining, and I found that it was easier to use a rag rather than use brushes. But I guess you could use like brushes for the small parts that's in the wood. But
Or the sponge brushes.
yeah, or like the sponge brushes, and that would probably make it a lot easier. But I think the rags, got a good amount of the staining process done a little bit quicker than the brushes would have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but for the final detail, we did, you can see in the corner there, Kiana and I did use some brushes to sort of get in the nooks and crannies because the rag was just not going to cut it.
Mm-hmm.
But after that first staining day, there weren't too many imperfections. And also, I don't know that anybody's going to be that particular about little
No,
imperfections. But
part of this process itself and this project specifically is that some of the charm is in the imperfection. So if it's got issues, especially if you don't use as dark a stain as we've got, having those bits of wood that are a little bit lightly colored aren't necessarily going to be a bad thing. It's just going to be variance in what you're looking at.
yeah, also, I am well known for my poise and grace. Not at all. And in the top, you can see the can just sort of committed suicide and jumped from my hands at one point. Andrew and I had not expected to start the project on this day, so we did not come in clothes to wear that we wanted to get dirty, and it aimed itself right at Andrew, and it left a lovely splatter there. So accidents are going to happen. Thankfully, he wasn't too mad at me.
No.
It's okay. It's beautiful art.
You got to dress accordingly for when you're doing it, you know.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
that is part of why we bought the tarps and put them down, was just in case we didn't want to leave a mess behind for people to discover years and years later and wonder what had happened at that spot.
Right.
So once we got everything put together, once we got everything stained and ready to go,
And we let it sit overnight too.
and we let it sit overnight
Yeah.
to dry. The next step was putting the pallets together. So we had decided on the vertical planter that had a hinge that connected the two pallets together. And the two pallets together pretty well were there to help stabilize each other, to make sure that the pallets weren't going to blow over in the wind or anything like that whenever things happened, because at certain points in the process, you know, we would leave our pallets standing and somebody would bump them or nudge them or just back into them, and they would go falling down to the ground, because they can stand, but you know, it's, you know, a couple inches worth of balance, which once bumped or once the wind hits or anything like that isn't worth too much. So we decided we were going to put a hinge on them at the top and the bottom to kind of help reinforce. And going into this, I had about half an idea of where the hinge was going to go. I'll be honest. I kind of went in knowing that the hinge would work and knowing that it would be doable, but not having in my head where the hinge was going to go. And so we spent probably a good 5 minutes just like standing the pallets up and repositioning them and just kind of holding the hinge up and going,
That might work.
Yeah, and trying to like fold it up or unfold it, and seeing if wood would hit wood or how it would.
Or the nose will hit like the other nose that are.
Oh yeah, as you were screwing in the hinge, a couple times you hit a nail.
Yeah.
So
Be careful of that, guys.
And so when you're planning, if you do add the hinge on, it's not necessarily necessary, but it is helpful. It does. It is there for a purpose, but you do have to be kind of selective of where you put it. Maybe even when choosing your hinge, make sure you've got a hinge that's sized or at least placed so it's not going to hit your nails that are in your pallets holding your boards on. It's not going to be hitting other things. But we eventually did get the hinge on without too many issues. Nobody lost a finger. Nobody had anything bad happen during this step.
right.
This was one of our more disaster-free portions. And then once we got the hinges on, it was time to make our planters themselves. And for this, we actually took probably a bit of a strange solution. It was inspired by some of the pictures that I saw while looking at ideas for this. We didn't actually put our plants in anything hard. There's nothing that's below them strongly supporting them. The only thing that's actually supporting our plants in the dirt and everything that's in is actually weed control fabric is what we put in. And we made baskets, and about halfway through this no, it was about a third of the way through, pretty early on, we had to go with a change of plans because Susie remained her graceful self.
Yeah.
I
I don't know what I was going to get, but I tripped. We had slung the fabric over it and we were sort of pushing the fabric down into the groove and then cutting it and then stapling it, or rather stapling it and then cutting it. And so we had fabric in one of the grooves, but the roll of fabric was out of it, and well, long story short, I tripped over it and jerked because it has the consistency a bit of a plastic trash bag, and it jerked it off the nails. So I ripped the fabric.
So we took the fabric off and it had gotten ripped. I think we were actually able to reuse that piece. It was just a slightly shallower basket for that one, which wasn't a big deal. And then instead of having the long roll, we decided to do what you see in the far right picture. We basically figured out how big we needed for one basket, and we just decided to cut out a bunch of squares.
Yeah.
Looking back, that was probably what we should have done from the beginning.
Yeah.
But, you know.
But trial and error.
Trial and error, and you know, that's what we're here for, is so that we can make all the mistakes to share the better way to do it with everyone else who's doing it.
Right. And also, it's been set up now for about a week out front of the building. Yeah. And that particular type of film is holding up well, but I know after time, gravity and the weather, the elements will take its toll. So what you may want to do if you do this is use the more fabric-based, but that does tear easy too. So maybe even a layer of fabric and a layer of the plastic-based, like just to make it a little more permanent.
Or one idea that I floated at the beginning that we just didn't do was just simply taking some of the excess wood from your pallets that you pulled off earlier in the process and essentially nailing it under the fabric, so you still had these fabric baskets. But over time, I'm personally expecting the fabric to last maybe a year or two, maybe 3 if we're lucky, just for longevity. But if you put a piece of wood down, either repurposed wood from your pallets or just wood you've got lying around or wood you buy specifically for this purpose, that would be pretty easy to attach, and it would keep the visual of your pallet planter pretty consistent with what we've got, but it would also add some longevity to it where either you could pull out the old fabric and put in new, or you could just leave it as is and have that as your new base or as your original base if you don't want to do this fabric-based planter.
But if you do put wood as sort of a foundation at the bottom, make sure you don't cover the whole area because you want a place for water to drain out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So don't make it airtight, but that would not be a bad plan B if either the weed control film is just something that you don't want to invest in, or if it's something that you want to just try and ensure a little bit more longevity. You could try that as an alternative option. Once we got the baskets made, we had our whole unit that was together, that was ready to go, and we kind of went into our final planning. We had a rough idea of where we were going to put this up front, and I drew my schematics. I took a look and took some pictures before we began this whole process. So I started trying to nail down in my head where we were going to put it, but until we went out there with the unit itself, knowing exactly how big it was, shy of doing a whole bunch of math that I just didn't want to do at the time. It was a lot easier to just go ahead and build what we were going to put out there and then take it out there and put it down and look at it and go, huh.
And we did. We moved it, like I had an idea of where I wanted it, and then somebody else wanted
I
to
had an
figure it
idea,
out.
and somebody else had an idea.
And then ultimately, the head librarian, Zelaquise Holmes, figured out, picked the best spot, and she gave and it was the best spot because it can be seen from basically any angle as you're walking up.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, this area in front of the library, there used to be a pretty large tree there, and a thunderstorm came through several years ago and just split it right down the middle. And there's sort of been this dip
Mm-hmm.
in the front yard, and just we haven't done anything with it. As you'll see, there's some decorative grass in that area underneath all that foliage. That it used to go around the base of the tree, so we had a little bit of stuff to work with in that area. But it was pointed out by another librarian that the green that you're seeing there is poison ivy. So Andrew was very careful when he pulled that up and took care of that.
Wash your hands with the cold water.
Yes.
Yep. See, I went through and cleared out the poison ivy, cleared out all the dead brown plant matter. There was a lot that was there, and actually ended up with a decently sized pile that was probably like a 2x2 pile of just.
And it didn't help also that was almost pure sand and very
Yeah.
dry.
Yeah.
You could have used a pickaxe on it.
Oh yeah. But we actually ended up, you see in that bottom picture, there was actually a lot more grass than I expected there. I was kind of thinking going into this that I was going to have just like 2 or 3 little tufts of grass that I was maybe going to be able to repurpose to help decorate the area around it. I think in my head originally I had just like 2, and I was going to put them at either end to kind of just bookend it. But there actually ended up being a lot of good usable grass there, and it wasn't that the grass itself was bad, but the area itself was just enough of a mess that you didn't realize it was there because the poison ivy was overgrowing it, because there was dead grass there that was growing up and over it, and everything else that it just needed to be cleaned up to be usable.
Yeah, thank you to Thomas for pointing that out, by the way, because we would have grabbed it, not barehanded, but it probably would have not ended well for us.
Yeah.
Probably not. So we got it put into position. We put it near our divot that we knew was there, and got ready to plant. So we pretty well, for the planting process, it was pretty straightforward. Other than the constant arguing and debating and everything else that we had over what plant should go where. We filled up our baskets with dirt, and we pretty well, I'd say, filled them about 2/3 for each basket to get them, because you don't want to overfill your baskets, or A, you're not going to have any room to put your plants because they came with dirt too, and B, if you overfill it, I mean, you're just going to be losing dirt that's not needed and not necessarily important to the process.
And I found with planting, you don't fill up your planter all the way for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
Once you put your plant in, you're almost always going to need to get another handful or two of dirt to
Mm-hmm.
sort of cover the root mound
Mm-hmm.
that's in the bottom of the.
And make sure it's well buried, and make sure it's just kind of secured in there like you want it to be.
Mm-hmm. And then always water it in.
Mm-hmm.
But that's
Even talking about like the position of the pallet, like how would the way that we put it, how would the wind affect, like so that the pallet won't fall over? Or...
Yeah, we did talk about that day too. We were lucky in that it's rather open in the middle, so it doesn't have a lot of resistance to the wind. I believe the term is aerodynamic. But we were pretty confident it would stay on its own. But another thing that Andrew came up with was sort of putting the decorative grass directly behind it, as you can see in the second photo, that's sort of shored up, because we figured the wind would be coming from outside, not from the building, unless something horrible happens. So that was the direction that the strain would be. So we put the grass to help shore it up a little.
And the grass also kind of made a backdrop for some of the flowers that were on the bottom, because we know the grass isn't going to overgrow into it because it's a separate planter. But the grass can get as big as it wants to get, and it can, fluff out and fill up. So you've got a background that's a darker green than the flowers we put in there, which were the impatiens.
Which are, they have red blooms. And we were correct, as you can sort of see it in the photo too, that when the sun is hitting straight up ahead, straight above, they're in shade, which is perfect for them.
Oh, yeah.
And then we sort of, we got plants, wanted to include them somehow, but we weren't quite sure where to place them or what to do with them. And you can see in some of the photos where we just have the pot sitting up there, and we're sort of feeling out what should go where.
And that is not where those plants ended up.
No, it's not.
We actually took, and part of what we were trying to do was balance everything out and make sure there was kind of a symmetry to it, and just some sort of order to it, because we're just kind of ordered people being librarians. And so we kind of sat there and we put the impatiens in first, and we put the purple basil in the middle because we wanted a splash of something different in the middle. And the purple basil kind of was framed by all that color in that middle spot.
Right.
And then we were originally going to put the lavender up top, but we also realized that we had marigolds and we had zinnias that we hadn't used yet.
Right, and because we originally planned for 4 layers, levels, and then we had 3. We really overestimated the amount of plants that we needed, but that's okay because we have plans on expanding this and using those plants. But we ended up not needing even really like half of the plants that we got.
We used maybe half of what
Yeah.
we had.
So we decided to use the lavender on either end and then the mint in the middle, which we'll see in the final picture. But also the lavender is going to get better sun there, and it can get as tall as it wants and not affect anything else.
And one of the other things that was nice that we were able to do as we were buying the plants, we mentioned that we picked out some that had multiple plants in a pot so that we could buy one plant and get 4 plants out of it, so that we were not just wasting money paying plant. It was paying for a plant and getting 4 plants if we could.
Right. With the purple basil was 1 pot, but there were 4 shoots, 4 plants in that pot, and we separated them out very carefully, separating the root ball, and we got 4 basil from 1 basil. So yeah, we were those customers digging through, like, well, this one's only got 3 and this one's got 2, and
Get
then,
a few looks.
as we mentioned, the bloom thing, you don't want to get something that's in full bloom because those blooms are not going to last you. You want to see the bud, and then as soon as you plant it and it gets settled, then you'll see a bloom, which now we have, I think, like 3 or 4 zinnias at the top.
I think today I came in, I saw 3. So they're starting to bloom. They're starting to look really good, and it's getting that color that we plan to get with it. With even the impatiens and the marigolds are all really colorful right now as well. So we got everything planted, and as we got it going, as you see in that left picture, all the flowers and plants and everything else were looking pretty good in the pot, and the area around it was kind of a mess because it had our dirt that we were mixing in, we not just in the baskets, but the potting mix that we bought, we were mixing into the dirt that we were planting with the stuff in the ground because, as we said, the ground itself was sandy, and sandy soil is not the best soil for planting stuff in because water just runs through it. It's not got a lot of nutrients. There's some issues with sandy soil.
Yeah. So we sort of dug extra deep when we
Mhm.
planted the mint and the
lavender.
lavender, even though mint is pretty hardy and I'd say it's going to be fine. But we put like a base of our potting soil down in the bottom just so it had a little layer of
Mhm.
nice fertile soil to grow roots in.
And so what we had done is during the buying phase, we kind of planned for this and we bought the cypress mulch, which not only would work as a mulch, which was something we wanted because it's going to prevent weeds, it's going to eventually help to fertilize the area as the time goes by and the mulch kind of loses the nutrients that were in it and that goes into the ground. But we also bought a lightly colored mulch to offset the dark wood that we did the stain so that there was that contrast there, so it wasn't dark on dark, and so that the building didn't look like a gloomy, dark, uninviting place with all these flowers out front to kind of do it. We wanted it to be welcoming, and we wanted it to look good, even with our choice of a darker wood. So we went through, and kind of one thing I noticed with the mulch is that spreading mulch, I knew it was kind of new to Agnes. Had you done a lot of mulch?
Not a bit.
So with mulch, in my experience at least, spread it by hand. It can be a little bit smelly because it's basically wood chips that are at whatever point of decomposition of they've just been shredded and
Yeah, it's a little
and
moist
left.
in there, so it's
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it can smell a little bit. Once you do, you feel free to wash your hands and clean up. But spreading it by hand works a lot better than trying to do it with a shovel or a rake or anything like that, shy of in large areas.
Yeah, especially if because we were sort of shaping the mulch around the plantings.
And that's what you want to do
yeah.
is you want to get it around the plants themselves because the closer you get, because it's not going to hurt the plants when they're already up. If as they're growing, as they're getting bigger, they can push the mulch out of the way because that's what plants do. But it's pretty well there to smother the things that you don't want growing. And so as you're doing it, you want to push it into the areas around the plants. You want to push it around what you're doing. You want to get the area covered. And the thicker you cover, that's all well and good. That's just more suppression between the weeds that are trying to grow and actually getting out to be able to grow and get that sunlight that they want. But generally about an inch is kind of the expectation for mulch. And as you can see, we pretty well kind of spread to that and ended up using right about 2 bags. It was about 1 bag for the front of this pallet creation and 1 bag for the back. And that went out about 8 inches or so from the pallet to make a decent area.
Oh yeah, it was yeah, probably all told maybe 3 feet wide, and then it's a chevron shaped.
Yeah. And each bag of mulch, if you're getting a bag, bags are about 2 cubic feet. If you're not getting a bag, there are ways to get mulch for cheaper for larger areas, though I don't know any in the area. But whatever you're using, there's different kinds of mulch, and they all work well as mulch. It really just depends on what you're specifically looking for. And as we kind of talked about with flower stains and everything else, if you don't know, ask someone who does, because there are people who garden a lot, who know these things. There are people who work at home improvement stores and places you can buy these things, who are trained to answer these questions because they want you to get the information you're looking for so that you will buy what they're selling. And so they're trained. If you are not sure whether cypress mulch is better than pine bark nuggets, you can ask and they'll tell you pros and cons of each. And so there is a lot of information for it that people who, if you're not experienced in this, have experienced it, have done it, and are generally happy to share because, I mean, why would you want to keep that knowledge unless you're some sort of garden Scrooge?
And what we also, we don't have a photo of it, but we accidentally uncovered a sewer grate,
A drainage
a
grate.
drainage grate, just behind where Andrew is standing in the second photo. So in order to ensure that rainwater runoff, which would come from the roof, didn't wash away all of our mulch and make it unstable. It was already sort of on a bit of a natural rise, but Andrew sort of dug a drainage ditch.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we ran the hose in it for a little while to sort of encourage nature to take its course. But yeah, so we work with your natural landscape and your environment and try to think about, especially if it's your own yard, hopefully you know where rainwater goes and where it pools and where it doesn't. So don't put a feature with loose mulch where you're going to get some flooding, because it's not going to
It's all going to wash away. It's mulch is wood chips, wood floats.
Right.
If you've got water running through where the mulch is going to go with it, unless it's every tiny bit nailed down, which would be kind of strange.
Yeah.
And so we finished up our final touches and ended up with a completed project. So we took some pictures. We were pretty proud of how it ended up, all things told. A few minor disasters, but nothing that we weren't able to.
Usually Susie related.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But nothing that we weren't able to overcome. You can actually see that drainage ditch that we talked about in that left picture behind
And
the
your-
flowers.
And the grate as well.
I think it turned out pretty well.
And as we said, it's lasted, and we watered the first day, and then watered a little bit the second day, and then we went away for the weekend, and it was not supposed to rain, but they survived. They did okay, and I think it did sprinkle, so it's held up really well, and the watering hasn't been too extensive. Like
No.
we haven't had to do much.
And one nice thing with this, if you are someone who has that black thumb, who plants die whenever you touch them, for one reason or another, if a reason has been overwatering, this is actually a pretty good system to deal with that.
Absolutely,
With
yeah.
how it's set up.
Because if you water the top, if you just water the top, it'll start dripping onto that second level, and then onto the third level, and then the third level, it's going to drip into the ground and go on its merry way.
Yeah, it's never going to hold more water than it will, because it is a fabric that is designed for water to go through it. Because otherwise, all your plants in your garden, if you were using this fabric, would die because they wouldn't get any water. So if you overwater, the water's going to drain out and going all the way down to the ground. If you still are overwatering down there, those are baskets that are still just sitting on the ground, so they're going to just drain into the ground. So you don't have to worry about overwatering with this system, which is really nice. So if you're not sure, you can water, and you can water extra, and if there's extra, it's just going to drain out and go into the ground and go into the groundwater.
Yeah. So that is our finished product.
All right. We hope you enjoyed, learning how we did this. Hopefully, it inspired some of you to do something similar. If you do, and you have any questions, feel free to contact us here at the library. We'll answer what we can. We can't guarantee we can answer everything, but
We're reference librarians. We know how to look stuff up.
we can speak from experience. We can speak from research and try and answer, if nothing else.
Right. And we do have some book resources, definitely on gardening, and I believe we also have a book on using pallets in various ways with other options, from coffee tables to porch swings. So there's lots of things you can do with this. This is just what we decided to do, and we hope that you have enjoyed spending time with us.
Yeah.